Chapter 29 I Cannot Keep a Secret. Thoughtfully walking back to camp from Long Stewart's tunnel that night, I was glad I had my boots on, even though the saying Death Adder Country merely meant some area where the Death Adder might appear noticeably during some favorable climatic season. However, anywhere in the bush on a summer's night, a man walking barefoot always risks a long-shot chance of treading upon some prowling snake. How far south of Herberton was Stanthorpe? Away down near the New South Wales border, about 800 miles or a trifle more. And yet the Jungle Man had known all about Stewart and the Death Adders, and I felt certain Stewart knew nothing at all about that bush wanderer. Long Stewart obviously had kept this little experience very quiet, and now asked me not to mention it even at the council fire. I had fully intended to ask Stewart how it was that the Jungle Man knew all about him and the adders, but he had seemed quite upset about the death of his mate. I was glad now I had kept my mouth shut at the council fire, but this keeping of secrets was becoming a bit of a burden. The very next morning I was down there, sitting under the candlelight in Long Stewart's tunnel again. In that slow drawl of his he yarned about the Chinese diggers, their fatalistic gameness, their hardihood and industry and cunning, their clannishness, their unshakable no-savvy when in trouble or on gold, and other secretive ways of theirs. I believe my new friend could keep a secret just as well. I remarked, casually, perhaps better. "Who is that, Jack?" "Oh, the chap you went walkabout with. The Jungle Man?" "Yes." Thoughtfully Stewart refilled his pipe. "Maybe you are right, Jack, now I come to think of it. Have you known him long?" Stewart glanced at me in surprise. "Why no, Jack, I don't know him at all. The first time I ever saw him was when he strolled into the light of the council fire that first night. He knows you very well, but Jack, he can't. I'd never even heard of the man until I met him that night. So then I told him, word for word, what the Jungle Man had told me about Stewart and the Death Adders. He listened in growing surprise. I could distinctly hear his heart now softly thumping, beat by steady beat, within that deathly quiet little tunnel. "You amaze me, Jack. I simply cannot place the man. I'm certain I've never met him before, and those little incidents happened years ago, and a long way from here, and were only known to a dozen men all told, and not one of them has ever come north. Then again, we treated those little happenings as some queer sort of natural joke among ourselves, though a very unpleasant joke to me, and I have very rarely ever mentioned the matter. As to this complete stranger away up here in the north knowing such details, well, I just can't make head or tail of it. I'm sorry I spoke about it now. It doesn't matter in the least, Jack. You've given me something new to think about, which will do me good. A man's own company becomes a bit lonesome at times. His thoughts are liable to wander in a circle, like a dog chasing its own tail. You've just sort of taken my breath away, as the saying is, and that slow, quiet smile of his came back again. Again I walked thoughtfully back to camp through the starlit night. Obviously, Long Stewart had something to puzzle and think about tonight, but I quite definitely knew what I knew, and that was that I could not keep a secret like the jungle man. It was while camped at Kalunga that one dawn I opened sleepily protesting eyes to Billy's boiled shake-a-leg, and there was the jungle man looking down at me with that shadow of a smile that passed for a grin. "Where on earth did you spring from?" I demanded. "Oh, I just blew along with the sunrise. Care for a walkabout?" "Where?" "Oh, the big scrubs. We might try a dish or two." "Sure," I agreed and threw off the blanket. "How long will we be away?" "Oh, a few weeks, maybe more. It all depends. Time doesn't matter. I've only got about a fortnight's tucker here." "Doesn't matter. I've got the rifle this time. We'll shoot our meat as we travel." "Roll up what flour and tea you've got, the tent fly and blanket. What I haven't got we'll get along the track if we need it." "Right, but I must tell Long Stewart, or he'll think I've fallen down a shaft or wandered into some old tunnel and been pinned under a fall." "Right. I'll roll up the fly, then breakfast and away." And Old Sol had not really shaken the mountain mists from his rosy crown before we were striding along the track towards Tumalin. My unusual companion did not explain whether he had camped close by, or whether he had walked through the night. I felt too cheerful to ask. If he did not feel like explaining, then he could do the other thing. The air and the birds and the physical effort of striding out seeking unknown scenes made me feel it was good to be alive. Tumbling creeks every few miles, the banks of some a red blaze, under flowering bottle brush, setting off the pure white of lilies and the vivid green of ferns, magnificent timber everywhere, and the early morning air would make a mummy sit up and yawn. I hope civilization has not driven away too much of the beauty which made life sweet in those enchanted districts. Here, still farther back at Cairns, development was taking place, like that which led to the formation of Atherton, Tolga, Malanda, Mariba, Gordonvale, Babinda, and Innisfail. Since these huge scrub areas had been thrown open for settlement as the railway crept slowly farther west and southwest, it had taken 24 years in stages to reach from Cairns to Herberton, and now it was coming creeping on again. Here and there, just within the scrubs, there appeared acres of mighty stumps where settlers were clearing their blocks of virgin land. Rich red ribbons leading into the cool of primal forest were the wagon tracks of the timber seekers. Little selections now being cultivated were showing a treasure house of deep red soil. "You know," I said, when that first night we were camped, snugly sheltered between the flanges of a gigantic fig tree, "in this new settler's land, this really is a new country, in this old world. In Europe and Britain, I suppose, every acre of soil has been turned over and planted for 1,000 years, or maybe more. But here, until a year or two back, apart from an isolated cattle station, Not even the pointed stick of savages has ever tilled the soil. I'd never thought of it like that before, but he merely grunted, staring morosely at the fire. Glancing at his set face, I gradually realized that what had thrilled me in this struggle of man against nature brought only despondency to him. I remembered now that all day we had walked along hearing the steely song of the axe, and now and then the shuddering crash of some timbered giant deep within the forest. Now, in the deep scrub silence, cozily sheltered by that great tree, I felt I felt sorry too. This sturdily buttressed gray giant had probably lived for 1,000 years, was good for 1,000 more, and now it too would soon fall to the bite of an axe. But what to do about it? The country had to be developed. Our first night in this big scrub was a silent one. A settler's home here and there was built upon the open forest, land adjacent to the scrub edge. Others were being built within the cleared scrub. These were of beautiful cedar, just 2 or 3 rooms to be added to with the yearly increase of crops and stock. The earliest of the settlers already had fine gardens and orchards. The land was eager to grow practically anything. There were shy youngsters too, the picture of health. He was quite good for a week of rambling, allowing my eager curiosity full play over a considerable area. Wherever settlers were active, I still have the warmest memories of those helpful, kindly folk, and the women folk fed me as if I had been a clumsy puppy, nosing his way about, but then they would do the same for anyone, let alone a shy bush lad. Yes, I had my own way for a wonderful week or more, until one night came a most strange feeling, an almost lonely feeling, that the jungle man was quietly saying farewell to all this, the big scrubs. I stole a glance at his face, reflected in firelight from the butt of a lovely silky oak, but his thoughts were only for the night mystery and murmurous whispering of this mighty forest. A miracle came floating on glorious wings into the firelight glow and hovered over the jungle man. The two were gazing at one another. A moth, but such a moth, as large as a dinner plate, its body of black and brown plush fat as a young mouse, and much longer, its wings larger than many a bird's, magic wings like broad leaves of a light brown plush, upon which were painted enormous eyes of gold, centered with a black pupil fairly shimmering in the firelight. It settled on the jungle man's boot, its wings softly pulsing. In delight I stared at it, estimating its wings must surely span a full 12 inches. "What is it?" I whispered. "A moth," he murmured. "What a wonderful thing! Why, it must be the father of all moths that ever was." "It is about the largest," he murmured. "There are plenty others, near as large, and plenty others smaller and more beautiful." "What is its name?" Lying there, he merely shrugged. "To hell with you," I thought, in one of your moods again. The moth rose on effortless wings. For all its size, it moved as if it were but a breath of life. It had taken no notice of me at all, but I'm blessed if it didn't hover over the jungle man a full minute, gazing down at him. Then it glided out through the firelight into the darkness. "What a lovely visitor," I ventured. He replied, neither by word nor by sign. A blackness dark as the deepest cave squeezed us in right to the little campfire, but I knew that somewhere far up above a velvet sky was speckled with stardust. The time must surely come, was coming fast, when starlight would gleam down here upon little homes and cattle and crops, and the family watchdog, while the green-eyed cat prowled about at night. Would the giant moths be able to live under open starlight? I wondered drowsily. I turned over in the blanket and breathed the breath of the trees until sleep came. He woke me for breakfast next morning by firelight. Sleepily I knew that away above this tree blackness a rosy dawn was kissing the hungry roof of tree tops. Countless leaves were eagerly opening out to drink their life from the sun. It was still practically dark when he stood up, slung on his swag with a curt, "We're leaving civilization behind us for a while now," and we were walking through the scrub, with the ring of some lonesome axe growing ever fainter and fainter. He was a different man in the big scrubs, my strange mate. He was happy too. He belonged here. He was a jungle man. I later came to really wonder whether he had a lot of those ancestor jungle cells in that lithe body of his. He seemed to glide along as noiselessly as a shadow, as effortlessly too, while clumsily I kept up with him. Fortunately, here the scrub was free of that entangling trap of lawyer canes and undergrowth that fights you every foot of the way. Here it was but a maze of tree trunks, canopied by their intertwining branches, and leaves shutting out the sun and enclosing us in a luminous gloom, with underfoot a dense mass of interlocking roots, carpeted by untold years of fallen leaves. All sense of direction quickly went from me. I merely followed close behind that lean, wiry figure ever moving ahead. Memories of favorite boyhood stories of the Pathfinders and Redskins of the American backwoods returned to me, and soon I had clothed him in buckskin, with a coonskin cap and long-barreled gun. In growing amazement, then I wondered how it would be possible to prospect such country. Why, you could not even see the ground. There was none. There were only tree trunks and roots and leaf-decayed loam, not one sign of a rock, let alone bare earth. And yet I knew that back on the coast, just south of Cairns, in dense jungle by the Russell River, some wonder-men of the scrubs had found gold, and were working it even now. But this man was never to lead me to a golden creek. He was almost afraid that we might actually stumble upon gold, for that would mean a gold rush, the axe, civilization, and bush fires, the end of his trees and birds and wild animals. But I would only realize this as the weeks flew by. With a startled croak, a scrub turkey ran almost from under our feet, then rising, flew clumsily up to a branch, staring down upon us with an agitated croaking that ended with the crack of the rifle and the heavy thud of the fallen bird. He picked it up, hung its neck through his belt, and walked on. We would have turkey roasted in the ashes tonight, or would it be boiled? I noticed now he carried two billies to his knapsack, one within the other. Trust him to save space and weight and bulk. His rifle, too, was only a light .22, the cartridges of no weight. We would not lack for meat in the scrub. There was plenty of turkeys, turkey eggs also, scrub hens too, and plump, gorgeously colored pigeons. You had to know about these things to learn their habits and their environment before you could even see them, let alone shoot them in that tangled maze. Out in the open forest there were wallabies, of course, and by the jungle edge the climbing kangaroo, but we never shot any of those quaint little things. In fact, the jungle man never used the rifle except to secure needed food. Chapter 30. Life is everywhere. Through this green world we pushed on next morning to no sound but the wail of the catbird deep within the jungle. Difficult to believe it is the same feathered terror when his piercing challenge defies rivals to dare trespass on his playground. A cunning mimic, that lively bird, a gay deceiver too. Later in the day I gazed entranced at what must surely be one of the loveliest of all things on wings, pushing out from the righteous foliage lining a creek. We paused by the moss-grown rocks to gaze up at the bright ribbon of blue far above these dense walls of greenery. The gleam of sky is beautiful indeed when you step thus from the jungle gloom, and a ball of living gold was fiercely vibrating before our eyes, just up there where the blue of sky filtered down between the green jungle walls. But a little bird with a little golden crest, a quivering ball of energy and life, its body a sheen in living gold. Even its eyes were shining beads of gold, and just to emphasize the gold, its body was shimmering in flashes of golden green. A flash, and it had darted to a palm tree. It hovered within an inch of the trunk, its wings vibrating gold, its outspread tail shimmering golden green. For a full 3 minutes it vibrated there as if in intense concentration. The speed of its golden wings must have been wonderful to have thus held it poised. In a flash it was gone. What was that beautiful thing? I almost whispered. The few who have seen it call it the golden bird, he answered, and his calm face showed that he too had gloried in the beauty of the thing. It is a bower bird. Like the catbird, there are different kinds of bower birds. This is lovelier even than the regent bird. It is the smallest too, but it builds the largest playgrounds, tunnels and runways and gunyahs, with walls of sticks and grasses and shrubs. You would not believe what a massive building is the playground of the little golden bird unless you actually saw it, and he was stepping over the slippery rocks to push into the wall of damp fernery opposite. If there is gold in the bed of this unnamed creek, I thought as I followed him, it could never be as beautiful as that lovely bird. Evening falls within the big scrubs, while sunshine still brilliantly bathes the forest lands. Away outside, we camped by a tinkling creek overgrown by palms and tree ferns, heavily draped in the silvered gauze of moist spider webs. My mate lit a fire from the damp wood of a living tree, and put both billies on to boil within a few minutes. Before the turkey had cooked, he had slashed out a space from the undergrowth, rigged the tent fly, covered the wet ground below it with a 2-foot depth of tree fern fronds, ready dried before that fierce fire, spread my fly over them, unrolled and spread the blankets, and there was a dry, cozy camp in the heart of a water-soaked jungle. I would not even have been able to find wood for a fire. How very different the big scrubs to the sunlit bush forest. How very different even merely to camp in. You'd think that yellow wood was soaked with kerosene, I said, amazed. There is a kerosene wood, he replied, but this wood is full of some rich, volatile oil. You'll smell it yards away soon. Billy's boiled, put the tea in. Hungrily devouring boiled turkey by that fierce, scented fire, I puzzled over the new bushcraft I had to learn. Suddenly I realized that the stars had gone. Only dense blackness was here, above and around the short reach of the firelight. Nearby, giant tree trunks were vividly illuminated in their dampness. That invisible creek singing nearby, a whispering drip-drip, pit-pat of moisture drops from the foliage above, and apart from the hum of the fire, a deathly silence, a black stillness slowly growing overpoweringly pregnant with a sense of some vast life. What on earth were we? Chewing the last morsel from the turkey leg, I stole a glimpse. At him, now feeling for the pipe in his belt. His lean face, bronzed by many suns, sharply reflected the firelight. Its air of restlessness had vanished, leaving a harmony of body and mind. This was some baffling intuition stealing upon me. It could not have been conscious thought. It was something born from these overpowering surroundings. As his fingers gently filled his pipe, his glance strayed through the firelight to the trunk of a magnificent kauri pine, ruddy gold in the dancing firelight. That lovely giant towered up into mysterious darkness, into which some queer sense whispered to me. His eyes could see much farther than mine. It grew upon me that he loved that tree. It is 1,000 years old, his voice said softly. Yes, it is beautiful, and only in the bloom of its youth. Too surprised to answer, I watched as he lit his pipe. Yes, he said roughly, and if cut down and sawn up, it would supply timber for 3 houses. You must have read my thoughts again, I blurted out, only realizing with the words that I must subconsciously have been thinking so. Yes, he replied quite simply. How so? Because we are 2 men, all alone in the heart of a primitive jungle, thinking practically the same thoughts. The big scrub, gold, tin, development, the future. All this jungle around us is breathing softly as our thoughts are flowing, but believe me, it is a mighty breath. Under such conditions, a receptive mind can read thoughts easily. Seeking to pull the conversation back to earth, I was about to speak, when the night was rent by a piercing scream, long drawn out in gurgling, gasping agony. I had sprung up, with head bouncing, the tent fly into a shower of water drops, hair on end, heart hammering painfully. I glared down at him open-mouthed. Even he was startled, but he laughed up at me. It's all right, he said quietly. It's only a jungle owl. Better tie up that corner of the fly where you've broken the cord before the damp gets at our blankets. It startled me a moment when you jumped up like that, but it is only a jungle owl." My fingers were trembling so that I could hardly tie up the fly. I crawled in under again, knees wobbling so that I was glad to flop down on the blanket. I thought, yes, I know, that some struggling woman was getting her throat cut. I have never heard that sound, fortunately. Sincerely hope I never will. But that seems exactly what it must sound like. But I breathed. "Are you sure it was only an owl, a bird? Of course, there is not a human soul within a good many miles of us, no aboriginals. We are quite alone, except for the life of the big scrub. My God, you actually travel at times through these places alone?" "Quite often," he answered seriously, "and love it. That cutthroat bird at times can give a man a nasty fright, but not when he knows what it is. You can have these dashed places all to yourself then," I said, feelingly. "I wouldn't camp in a place like this alone for anything, not even if I was to find a gold reef. I believe you'd risk it," he smiled. "When you calm down, I think I know you a little. The chance of gold would lure you anywhere. That's the reason why you're camped here with me now. A man you are puzzling to understand, a long way away, a very different setting to old Mick's homely campfire, and you know in your heart that you've very little chance indeed of finding gold. And believe me, I know why." He looked steadily at me a moment. It was almost a kindly look. Again I experienced that eerie feeling that he could read my thoughts. Anyway, and he started to fill his pipe. That was only a jungle owl, in love, telling his mate he had made a kill. "A jungle owl in love," I murmured lamely. "Yes," he smiled quietly. "The most natural thing in the world. Quite human, just as a married man would do if he struck a rich patch of tin, just as a businessman does when he makes a good bargain, rushes home to tell the wife all about it, to throw out his chest, preening himself to win her admiration and show her what a great man he is." That blood-curdling shriek was merely Old Man Owl telling his wife he had made a juicy kill, and she needn't worry about the cupboard being bare, as he'd assured her all along. He was merely blowing out his chest, telling her what a fine fellow he is, before hurrying home with the family bacon. You see, she'll be sitting at home on the nest in some cozy tree in the scrub nearby, feeling pretty hungry and grumpy as to what the old man is going to do about it. She daren't leave her warm eggs to the cold of night. If she's got very young chicks, she wouldn't leave them either. She'd be much more pleased than you when she heard that blood-curdling screech. And he chuckled. "I wish he'd broken his wretched neck," I grumbled. "He scared the very daylights out of me. Why couldn't he have made his kill in peace and just flown home to her quietly with it?" "Because that wouldn't be natural," he replied gravely. Still a bit uneasy at that awful scream, I growled. I still wish the wretched thing did his love-bragging less horridly. Sweet music to him and her, he replied simply, the music of life. They have to eat to live. If they cannot eat to live, they cannot love. Even worms make love. I took the pipe from my mouth, gazed at him a moment, then in reaction, I suppose, burst out laughing. Now tell me, he said sharply, just what you would do if your pick unearthed a nugget of gold. I'd yell out to my mate, I replied instantly. Of course, he grinned, and that would be natural. A dashed sight more natural than worms making love, I protested. Why not? He replied simply. Why, only this morning you watched an energetic turkey dressed in his wedding glory, showing off his paces while making love to his mate. Ah, you had not thought of it that way. No, I admitted, it didn't strike me at the time. And yet they were even building their home and doing their courtship before you. You must train yourself to become ever so much more observant, else you will never make a bushman. Well, everything makes love, worms included, or at least one certain species does. I don't know about them all. These particular worms, in season, and when atmospheric conditions are correct, and only during the full of the moon, come up out of their holes in the ground and seemingly stand on their tails and dance crazily, twining themselves around one another in a very crazy Merry Widow waltz. I see you don't believe it, but I have actually seen this happen, though only on 2 occasions, in widely separated areas of the bush. Of course, I did not believe him, but I was wondering at this new side to the jungle man. I had not known him so human before. I was puzzled whether to laugh or not. He half smiled towards the fire. You simply will not believe. I have heard it declared, he said musingly, that if Christ came upon earth again, people simply would not believe him. I wonder. Many years later, as man's puny lifetime of years is measured, in the Kimberleys, nearly 3,000 miles westward, aborigines guided me one brilliantly moonlit night to a claypan flat, sparsely tufted with spinifex. Here, from innumerable tiny holes in the sun-baked clay, emerged a species of worm in unknown numbers, standing on end, the tail clinging by some means to the lip of the burrow. Each worm began to sway gently, slowly increasing speed until, in twisting, frenzied contortion. In that brilliant moonlight, in that lonesome place, it was a most fantastic happening. I gazed amazed, hardly grinning in reply to the aborigine shrieks of laughter, at the white man's expression at this dance of the worms. I had learnt many things throughout the years by that time, but only then did I realize in a flash that what the jungle man had told me so many years before, away back in the Evelyn jungle, was true, and now, this very night, in the big scrub, again he was to tell me something which I could not believe until eventually I saw it for myself. Have you ever seen the Mulga Snake? No. Well, he is a real snake, believe me, a very nasty customer if startled or interfered with. The male grows to a length of 5 feet, a little over maybe, fully as thick as a man's wrist, strong, savage, swift, a brownish-yellow color which merges so well with the parched earth. I am not a man of the Mulga. I very nearly left my bones there on a prospecting trip northwest of Townsville. By the way," and he looked at me quizzically, "there will be big mineral deposits found some day in that God-forsaken country, an area where settlement would not destroy beautiful scrubs. But don't venture out there unless with one of the very few bushmen who understand the country there, or you'll never return. We lost our camels. They ate poison bush, filled up with water at a rock hole, and swelled out with gas like enormous balloons until they burst, and it takes something to kill a camel, believe me. Well, out there is where I met the Mulga Snake, and in the mating season, when I saw the two of them, I stood in my tracks. Neither reptile took the slightest notice of me. Both were violently agitated. She had come up from a hole under the spinifex. I first saw him slithering along in an urgent flurry to hiss her at the hole. It was then she had come up. They stood fairly up on their tails, swaying there at one another, hissing all the time. He swelled out to near twice his size. His distended scales had a ruddy glow where sunlight caught them between the scraggly mulga. They were oblivious to everything but themselves. Violently, then, they began seesawing their thick necks across one another, hissing furiously. They grew passionate to madness, a weird sight. It lasted quite a long time. Thoughtfully, he refilled the pipe, the hum of the fire, the tinkling of the creek, musically clear now, above the monotonous dripping of the trees. He lit up and resumed. Out of this overwhelming curiosity of mine, I passed that way the next morning. The ladies' home was quite close to the camp. Sure enough, there they were at it again. Next morning I came earlier. Presently he appeared, slithering out of the mulga, again in a desperate hurry to hiss down in her doorway. She must have been waiting just below, for her snout popped straight up and knocked his head back right smart. But it was only a love kiss. They were swaying all over one another and sawing one another's necks, as if very life depended upon it, which I suppose it did in a way. However, that evening my mate, returning to camp, came upon them and blazed at them with a double-barreled gun. He hated snakes, was almost terrified of them, as some men are. Next morning I passed that way again. The male had been blown into shreds and was hanging limply across a mulga branch, but she was still alive, though blown almost in half. There she was, half in, half out of her home, swaying weakly, hissing weakly too, her head peering this way and that, waiting for her mate. She was wounded to death, but she was still waiting for her mate. I shot her quickly. I felt sorry for her. He was silent. The creek was softly crooning. I crawled outside for more wood. The jungle blackness was fast closing in on the fire.